Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi everyone, today we're talking with Lynn Faust. Lynn is the author of Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs, Identification and Natural History of the Fireflies of the Eastern and Central United States and Canada. She is also sometimes called the Lightning Bug Lady, and with good reason, as you'll soon see. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this episode is going to be a little different than previous episodes. Lynn is so knowledgeable, enthusiastic, and has so many great stories that I kind of got a little carried away. Our conversation ended up being twice as long as most of my other conversations. So I decided to split it into 2 episodes. Part 1, which is this episode, and Part 2, which will come out next week. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Hi, Lynn. Welcome to Backyard Ecology, and thank you for talking with us today.
Hey, Shannon. It's good to be here.
I am so excited to have you on this podcast today because lightning bugs have always held this really special place in my heart from the time I was a little kid just running around catching them to even today as an adult. I still have to go out and look at the first lightning bugs every year, and I'll go out and just stand there and watch them sometimes because they're so gorgeous. And I don't know, they've just always had this special place, like I said, in my life, and I can't imagine them not being there. But they've played an even bigger part in your life and your story. So before we really get started, I want you to tell us just a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you got started on this journey, because I absolutely love your story and how you became the lightning bug lady.
Well, that's a long story, Shannon. I don't think you want to hear the whole thing, but I'll give you a condensed version. I loved your intro on the fireflies because they do bring out the child in everyone. It doesn't really matter your age. It's so beautiful, kind of awe-inspiring, magical. And I feel like we're really lucky in the Eastern US to have so many different species and so many different displays. So it keeps all of us, the child in us alive, all of us. And like you, I'm a child of Tennessee, not Kentucky, but I grew up with lightning bugs around me every summer. I didn't realize other people didn't necessarily have the displays we're lucky enough to have as children. So for the first 39 years of my life, I simply enjoyed lightning bugs like everyone else around here, and would look forward to seeing them in the summer and all of that. We had a cabin up in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for years, generations, and the park has taken it over now. But well, I'd been seeing them up there since the 60s, but we realized in the early 90s, late 80s, that what we were seeing up there in the Smokies was different from what we had down in the valley where we lived. Even though it's just like 40 miles away, what we saw in the Smokies was entirely different and very beautiful because it was a synchronized flashing where all the males would flash together, and then for 6 seconds, all the males would go dark, and then it would start again, and this would go on for a couple of hours every night in the nights of June. And that started sucking me away from just being somebody who enjoyed being outdoors. I've always loved nature. I've always been miserable inside. So let me backtrack. So enjoying lightning bugs from childhood on was just part of my love of nature and being outside. And our cabin in the Smokies was just perfect because we were in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was really a very special place called Elkmont. But anyway, in the late 80s, early 90s, we knew we were losing our cabin. We had to leave in 1992. The entire 100-year-old community had to leave. And as you know, when you're losing something you love, and in advance you're going to lose that loved thing. Sometimes we don't know in advance, but sometimes you do. And in this case, we knew we were losing our cabin in 92. And it dawned on us, among all the other things that we were sad about, this was a multi-generational cabin. So when I say we, I mean my late in-laws, the cousins, the babies, all the generations, 4 generations were regularly up there every weekend. We started noticing things a little more because we realized we weren't going to see them again. And that's when we really focused in on the fireflies we were seeing up there, and we called them lightning bugs, were not what we had seen before. And so I began then to step into the world of science. And my degree is in forensic anthropology and double major in forestry. So again, looking at things has always been what I like to do. But I approached the park first and then the University of Tennessee and other people to make sure they knew about these lightning bugs up there. And at the time, I think like 99% of the people, before they take a very intense interest in something, I thought all lightning bugs were the same. You see them flashing differently, but you really don't look that close. It's just this relaxing, beautiful thing to enjoy. And suddenly I started looking more carefully, like, what are they doing? And my mother-in-law was in her 80s then, Emily Faust, and she had named it the Light Show years ago, like in the 60s. And she say, okay, everybody get your pajamas on, put the babies to bed. We're sitting on the porch at 9:30, the Light Show will begin. And so it was something we would look forward to as a family every summer, sitting wrapped in blankets on our porch, a screened-in porch facing a mountain and a little stream, enjoying the light show. And it's very peaceful and it sort of makes you sleepy. And so after a few minutes, you just get so relaxed. And even though it's silent, you feel a rhythmic sort of pounding of the lights and the intensity. But then everybody just drift off to bed. But anyway, once we realized we had never seen these in the valley, and so I started asking the park and the University of Tennessee, no one knew about it. No one had any idea what I was talking about. And one person said, oh, you mean June bugs? I said, no, I don't mean June bugs. I mean lightning bugs. They flash together. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And so then I ventured a little further. And at the time, for years, I'd taken a magazine, back when we all got magazines, called Science News. And during this same time period of realizing we might have something special, but that we were getting ready to lose it or lose access to it, Science News arrived. I think it was a weekly or monthly thing. And on the front was a picture of a tree filled with fireflies flashing. It was a beautiful picture. And I looked at it and the title was something about synchronous fireflies around the world. And I thought, oh, I bet I'll find out about the Elkmont fireflies. I'll read this article. Well, I read the article and what jumped out at me, it said there are no synchronous fireflies in the Western Hemisphere. And I thought, well, that's not right. We've got them at Elkmont. And since that time, we have several species of synchronous fireflies. Each one does differently, but two very dramatic ones in the east of the U.S. But anyway, so I got the name of the scientists who were mentioned in the article, and I contacted them. And again, this is the days of snail mail and no cell phones and any of that. And the one scientist was actually working in Malaysia on synchronous fireflies when I tried to contact him. So it was about 4 months before he could write back. By then, our fireflies were gone. But anyway, that sucked me into the world, away from just sitting in a chair enjoying them to doing the scientific work. And I worked with that scientist and his partner, it'd be John Copeland and Andy Moisef, for the next 18 years. And we spent our Junes in Elkmont researching that one species of firefly. And we learned a lot about it. And they, in the meantime, became intensely popular to where it's a circus up there now and it has to be managed, the crowds and all. But it brings a lot of people back into nature. But somewhere along the way, I realized once you look at one thing closely, you start realizing a lot of other things, how much you don't know. And suddenly I thought, well, then what do we have in the valley? If this thing's different up here, and then pretty soon I realized I wasn't just seeing one species up there. I was seeing different kinds of blinks and flashing. And I was in my 30s then, so I could see the color of flashes much better. And I was seeing yellow flashes. I was seeing green flashes. And sometimes I was seeing orange flashes. And we even have one called the blue ghost that appears bluish and glows like a ghost, and they're wonderful. And see, I'm thinking mammoths might have those too, because I found them across the Ohio River in Indiana and Illinois this year. But anyway, that's a different quest for you. So we have several farms here in East Tennessee. And so one day I just sort of thought it up. I thought, I wonder how many species we have on our properties, because we have a lot of different habitats. If I include all of them, we have Cumberland Mountain and Holston River, and then just a regular farm. And so I started at that point just to learn the species at my own place, places I had access and often visited and was very familiar with even in the dark. And that's what I would suggest for anyone out there who's wanting to get a little deeper into the world of fireflies. First, learn what you have in your spot. It might be, if you're lucky enough to live where it's dark and you have good habitat, you might have them literally right out your back door, or maybe it's your favorite state park or conservation area or grandma's farm or whatever. You do need darkness and you do need intact habitat. And you will learn that each firefly species has its own habitat. And some of them are only around ponds with cattails, and some of them are out in open fields, but each one is a different species. And they have a timetable, a very predictable timetable where they show up during the year. For instance, near your area, at the end of next month, you'll start having flashing way up in the trees, the spring treetop flashers. That's Coracamina borealis. And they are always the first flashing species of the year throughout the eastern U.S., generally. Florida is some exceptions, but even in Florida, they're one of the first flashing species that comes out. So when people contact me in March that they are suddenly seeing a flashing up in their trees, I look like a rock star because I can tell them, even without a picture of it, what they probably have. It gets a lot harder by June, where you may have 15 species active, in the same week in different parts of the sky in your yard and everything. But anyway, the Elkmont synchronous fireflies, Photinus carolinus, sucked me into the world of fireflies. Then through the research teams, I began to get more academically interested in them. And then I decided to figure out what we had on our properties. And I was amazed, ultimately over 26 species on all of our farms. That's a lot, but that's fairly typical for anywhere in the East if you spend enough time looking and have kind of a larger area to look over. But almost anyone should be able to find about 15 species in their area if they're in the eastern U.S. We're very rich here, very blessed with diversity of all types.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love the fact that you went from just noticing, because I'm like you, I never really paid attention. I mean, they're fireflies, they're lightning bugs. There's like one, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what most people think. Yeah. And there's actually, even in the East, there's a predictable process of which ones they usually learn first. And that's sort of fun. That's when I can tell someone is starting to fall deep into firefly nerdom. It's like, well, I noticed one that was up in the tree and and so it's fun. And you can enjoy them all the way from the lawn chair where you think they're all the same thing up to trying to find how many do you have in your own property, your own little parkland. And by doing that, you realize it's pretty darn hard. And my book, it's the first field guide for North American fireflies, for Eastern and Central North American fireflies. I don't cover the West Coast because they're all pretty strange and I didn't know enough to write about them. But you realize it is a real art to it. And I find some of my, I call them my students, people do show up and that people do find me. And you can tell the ones that are going to be super dedicated, they show themselves pretty quickly. And what I'm seeing is most all of them already are naturalists. They already love nature. I don't mean naturalists in the formal sense. They are people who love being outside, but a whole lot of them are already maybe a moth or butterfly person or a birder. And so they already have very good observational skills. And often they have mastered their field already and they're kind of looking around. It's like, oh, but fireflies are tough. They're little bitty. And until you know them, they all look alike. But then once you really know them, there are ways to tell them apart. And that's kind of fun. And my guide is a no-kill guide. The gold standard is dissecting the male genitalia for many of the species, which sounds horrible, but it is the way you identify a lot of insects if you just have a dead insect with no information with it. But my book, I wrote that people could sit in their lawn chair outside and using the clues of what is the flash pattern, what time of year, what time of night, how does that one insect fly with the others? Those are also clues to tell what you're looking at. And I think that's more fun because that way you don't have to bother the firefly itself.
Exactly. And I love the fact that you've gone from, like I was saying, just that interest to passion to curiosity. And now it's pretty much become a second career. And I'm kind of in that transitioning from the, ooh, pretty fireflies to, oh, which I mean, when I was a kid and growing up and everything, I saw fireflies and they were just in the yard. A few years ago, we moved to our farm. We found like almost dream property for us.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, I started noticing that they weren't just like all in the yard like I used to see.
Right.
Then I had those ones that were way up in the treetops and really early. And then ones that were a little bit later that would be along the fields. And they were all like a few inches depth. And it was just like blinking.
Yeah, they kind of have a horizontal layer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so those would show up a little bit later, but the tree ones would still be there a little bit. And then the tree ones would disappear and then new tree ones would come. And then I still had the ones that were just kind of flying around at normal, let's go catch them out in the yard level.
Yeah,
and
the power hours.
Yeah. And so then I'm starting to go, wait a minute, there's got to be different species. I want to know more.
Good for you. You are well on your way. And that's exactly how you do it. You kind of get to know each one's personality and time of appearance. And my husband, who poor thing, has to listen to fireflies all the time, but he calls the ones you're describing in your yard, for the most part, are what we call the Big Dippers, Photinus pyralis. And they are very common and widespread. And they're such fun because they flash at dusk. So the children can run around in their bare feet and catch them or look at them in the dusk. But my husband's always called them the yard bugs. And if I'm traveling when they first come out, and they will come out, and it's usually in Knoxville, Tennessee, it's usually right at the end of May. I use a degree day method to predict it, but in general, right at the end of May, you see them. And you might get them a little earlier in your area because you're lower in elevation, but about the same. But he'll text me. He'll go, the yard bugs are out. And they do a slow, lazy flash. They're easy to catch. And so they're a fun first one for most people to learn. They're quite hardy because the flashing is a sexual communication between the males and the females. It's all about finding a mate. That's why they flash. And for many of the species, they demand darkness. They have to have darkness to find their female, which is usually hidden on the ground. And she just does a little cryptic answer back, a little flash, not the same as the male flash. It's different. But the yard fireflies, the Big Dippers, are fun because they don't need true darkness to find one another. And I think it's one reason they're surviving in urban areas better and in yards that do have the light pollution. And they're fairly large as far as fireflies go. So that kind of helps them. I call them in the book the coyotes of the firefly world. They're more adaptable. But anyway, they're fun, and you start with that. And so pretty soon I have some amazing naturalist friends in Ohio. Ohio has really taken off with fireflies, and they have a lot of them up there. But one naturalist got so good so fast, but she was already good. She was already good at everything. But she got to where and then there's a young man, they noticed when something was different. They didn't know the names of everything yet, but they could remember that they had never seen that particular flash. And that's a sign of somebody really coming along, that they can see what is not normal. But you have to know enough of what is expected and normal to be able to recognize what's different. And they have found several species that no one thought could be there, but they're there. But all that takes experience. We'd all like to get to that level real fast, but you really can't. You have to, like a baby has to learn to walk before it can run, and the same thing. But if you can enjoy your Big Dippers in your front yard and see, you've already noticed, clearly you easily have 5 species that you already know about. Mm-hmm. And you probably have others. It gets hard. A lot of the tree ones that do the beautiful displays, like in fence lines and stuff, mm-hmm. they will be replaced every 2 weeks by another similar species.
Oh, wow.
And so often it's almost continuous. The night the first species starts to decline huge levels, it's taken over by another one with a difference in flash. But you don't necessarily notice that. You just notice all summer that fence row might look really beautiful, but it might have had 5 species come and go. And In general, the adult fireflies, there's always exceptions, but in general, they come and go in about a 2-week period. It's a bell-shaped curve. The big fat part of the bell shape is a 2-week, and usually there's really only 1 to 3 nights of peak. And many species just have 1 night of peak where it's so astonishing you just can't believe how many you see, and then they rapidly fall off, because it makes sense if you think about it. They have got to find those females in their short life. They have got to mate, and that female has got to find a good place to lay her eggs, and it all has to happen as quick as possible. And so they are timed, they are programmed to all come out at the same time for the same species. And then the only thing they do is try to find one another. And it's hard. Yeah. And they have all these dangers. And, it's really astonishing. They continue even without all the problems humans throw at them of light pollution and pesticides and compaction and habitat destruction. But they're programmed to survive. And luckily, a lot of them are doing fine.
I want to get into the life history a little bit more in a couple of minutes, but you brought up a point that just made me think of a question. If they're peaking and they're mating displays for only 2-3 days, does the weather play an impact on that? I mean, like if we have one of those really rainy nights or really awful days, or not, I guess it'd be nights in this case, does that kind of shift it a little bit, or is it just kind of you had your chance and that's it?
It's sort of you had your chance and that's it. But it also depends. Again, it's a bell-shaped curve. So there's a lot of nights leading up and nights after where they can all still find one another. The peak night represents the maximum number that have come out already. That means the word is eclosed as adults. They've changed from pupa to adult. The maximum number have eclosed before any start to die.
Okay.
And so it's sort of just a mathematical thing. They're probably not even particularly aware of it. But in some of the more vulnerable species, like the blue ghosts that I mentioned, that I really think you should have around there, they have little larviform females that are the size of a grain of rice, and they hide on the ground and shine up. They literally have 1 night peak. And if you get the bad rainstorm, like you're talking about, that can kind of wipe them out, and they will never recover. Hopefully enough have found each other before that bad night of weather. But their numbers will be, I'll just make these up, but this is what it will be like. You'll be seeing in a certain area, first you'll see the first one. You might just see 1 the first night, and then the next night 10, the next night 20, the next night 50, and then it will shoot up to 150. And you get 1 night of 150 in that area. And then if you get the rain, I've had it happen every way. You get the rain, and you never see more than 10 again. And then in a week, they're gone. Oh. And so the rain does affect those because they're real small, weak ones. If their wings are wet, they don't fly well. But where some of the bigger, stronger ones, the predators that live in the fence lines, they're more spread out. And each species, some have the super peak. They all come out and then they all die. Others kind of dribble along, like your big dippers in your yard, have a fairly long season, a prolonged season. And again, you get into each species has their own little way of doing it that works for them. And, why do some of the species have females with no wings and others have females that can fly as well as the males? But they're all lightning bugs. But each one has found a way that works for them to survive the most. The species with the females with no wings are the most vulnerable to disappearing locally in 1 year if everything bad happens to them. And I've watched that. Our area used to be very rural where we live, and now it is the popular subdivision land. And I mean, I've watched populations just snuff out, and it just takes 1 year of a bulldozer moving all the earth, and that's it. They don't come back. So that's kind of sad. I mean, we still have pockets of them elsewhere, but they're more vulnerable.
Yeah. And I've seen the ghosts. I believe it was the blue ghost, but I think there's a couple different species of ghosts, but I've seen the ghosts at the Smokies one time when I was visiting, and never thought to look at them really. I'm going to have to pay more attention.
And it's one of, besides your Big Dipper in your front yard and the synchronous, if you go to visit them, they have such a a distinctive flash pattern. People learn them very quickly once you've seen it. But the blue ghost is about the third most popular because you can clearly go, well, that's a blue ghost. It doesn't look like anything else because it continuously glows and just flies a foot or two above the ground. And they're fun because everyone likes that name also. And they're actually green, but to many eyes, including mine, they look bluish at a distance. We don't really know why. But yeah, they're fun. And you're right, there are several others in the ghost family. There's the shadow ghost, and actually I wrote an article this year on a new one called the Low Country Ghost down near Savannah, Georgia. Shouldn't be there at all, and they're there. I've seen them 2 years in a row now. Pretty interesting. So it will be a new species someday. But the ones in the Smokies are really, really good because they'll glow for as much as 60 seconds at a time. So they're real easy to find and to see.
And I just realized something that we probably should stop and mention. Maybe should have talked about it at the beginning, but oh well, we were having too much fun talking other things. Lightning bugs and fireflies are exactly the same thing because we've both used both words throughout this conversation.
Yes, they are the same. And that the title of my book, Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs, one reason and then there's a lot of, how it's natural history and a field guide. I use that for the main part of the title because people don't quite understand that. It depends on what part of the world you're in, what part of the U.S. you're from. It's almost a regional thing, whether you call them fireflies or lightning bugs. And then glowworms, and I go into it in my book, actually can deal with several entirely different little creatures that glow. And most of them are fireflies, but there are Fingotes, or railroad worms, and the bioluminescent fungus gnat larvae. And so I go into that in the book to show, but generally, lightning bugs and fireflies are the same. I'm sad. I was 38 years old before I heard the term firefly. I had never heard of that. They were lightning bugs in East Tennessee. And then when I started working with two northern scientists, they were calling them fireflies. And I had to you didn't have Google in those days. We didn't have cell phone, but I had to sort of ask. I said, are we talking about the same thing? And now I'm sad because I use the word firefly more often than lightning bug simply because it's one less syllable. And in a talk, I might have to say it 300 times. And so I've reverted to fireflies. Fireflies have become hugely popular in the media also. So I'm hearing East Tennessee children call them fireflies now. And the term lightning bug seems to be kind of going away. And I hate that because I like that one. But they're not bugs and they're not flies. They're all misnomers. But everybody kind of knows what they're talking about.
Yeah. Now I call lightning bugs and fireflies interchangeably. And so much so that I couldn't even remember what I called them as a kid. I thought it was lightning bugs.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. So I asked Mom last night when I was talking to her.
Oh.
And she was like, we always called them lightning bugs. And in fact, she said that she learned fireflies from me.
Okay.
And then I started thinking, I was like, well, when did I start using fireflies? And I have no clue. And I'm not even sure which one I use more often now. I mean, just it's whatever comes out of my mouth as to whether they're lightning bugs or fireflies.
Yeah, well, we hear it now with the internet and all that. There was an English professor that had a map. I've got it somewhere on my hard drive. It's great. That mapped in the US who says firefly and who says lightning bug. And that has even changed since I've been doing lightning bugs. It was very clear in the 90s. It's not anymore. But he colors the country. And of course, generally lightning bugs are a southern term with pockets in the north, and fireflies were more northern. But it's no longer particularly true. But it was kind of a neat map that he had done, just seeing the local name. And anytime I travel anywhere in the world, that's one of my first questions. I'll find somebody that lives wherever we are and try to get the name of what do they call the things that flash in the night. And there's some beautiful names around the world. And even if it's in a foreign language, it's often a repetitive name like clip, clip, hing hoi, which denotes kind of flash, flash. And so that's always fun. And then I get them to translate it for me if possible. And they most all mean something like fire belly, fire tail, lightning, it's sort of a universal thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And yeah, I've seen that paper that you're talking about where they were looking at who says what where. in the U.S.
Yeah.
That was really
Yeah.
interesting, which living in Kentucky, I was in the mixed zone, which just brings up a whole bunch of other things about Kentucky.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I said, I mean, I grew up here and I called them lightning bugs. Now, my mother was from North Carolina, so maybe that's why. But
she's definitely a lightning bug.
yeah, she's definitely a lightning bug person.
That's cute. Two of my grandchildren are from Wyoming, and or they live in Wyoming. And although there are tiny pockets of flashing fireflies all the way to the West Coast, that's one of those misnomers. You do really need to know where to look, and most people never see them. But it was so fun when my oldest grandson came east in the summer and he saw them. I got to watch him see his first lightning bug, and it was so amazing. He just had this look of astonishment, and you'd see him, he's turning his head like, what am I seeing? He was just little then. He was about 18 months old, and it was just such a treat to get to witness someone seeing their first fireflies. It was beautiful.
Oh, yes. And I can relate to that, not with little kids, but actually older kids, because for a long time, I never knew that there were places that didn't have lightning bugs. I mean, they're just there. Everybody has them.
Yeah,
and,
we're lucky.
Oh, yeah, I've realized how lucky we are. But I was actually with my husband. We were up visiting some of his family in northern Indiana. And he has distant cousins that live in Australia, and they happened to be up at the same time visiting.
Oh, wow.
And some of the cousins were the kids, probably early middle schoolish age. Australia was one of those places that, I mean, to me, especially back then, was like, oh my gosh, they've got all the really cool animals. I really want to go. Just the whole grass is always greener. Over there's got all the really
all that cool stuff.
That thing that we always fall into. Everybody does. And we'd gone out to eat. We came out of the restaurant, and there were lightning bugs everywhere in the parking lot. It just happened to be the perfect right time. And the kids weren't sure what they were seeing.
Yeah.
They were kind of, what? And I was like, they're lightning bugs. I'm like catching them. I'm an adult here, but I'm catching them and showing them to the kids, running around the parking lot with them. I just became a big kid at that point again. But yeah, and that was one of those points where I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We've got really interesting stuff here. I don't have to go to Australia to find really cool, interesting things. They're right here in my own backyard. And that was really one of the catalysts that got me looking at and appreciating more and valuing all the wildlife that we have.
That we have right here. That's right. And to get to see young teens who are trying so hard to be cool, you know, I mean, that must have been fun, because suddenly they turn back into a child going, what is this? What is that? That's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Although Australia has them too, but again, it's kind of like out west, because of it's so dry there and all. They're only in certain areas, and you really have to look for them there. But we're just polluted in them here. It's great. You know, we have a very nice, we're lucky.
Oh, yes. I am so glad that I got to grow up and now live in a place that has lightning bugs, because like I said, I can't imagine not having them.
Oh, they do. They just add joy to every season.
So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to go through in a little bit more formal way, just so that things don't get lost in the cracks. So we've said lightning bugs aren't bugs, fireflies aren't flies, either one.
Right.
They're actually beetles, and they go through a complete metamorphosis just like a butterfly does. So I'm thinking maybe we should quickly walk through that life history a little bit. About how long do they spend as an egg?
Okay. As you said, complete metamorphosis. They are a beetle. They are, you know, a regular beetle. And the eggs they spend, I'm going to give you very rough terms. I could always tell exceptions and confuse everybody. Roughly 3 weeks as an egg. And that is laid often upon the mother right before she dies. She will lay one big clutch of eggs. Some of the species will actually space them out over several days, but then the mother usually dies as soon as she's gotten the eggs laid. And hopefully she put them in a nice place where they get, like the 3 bears, they don't get too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet. they're really kind of vulnerable, and it's sort of hard to rear eggs. As a human, I usually overdo it with the moisture because I know they need to be moist. So then I do too much, and then a fungus comes and kills them. But anyway, they're eggs for about 3 weeks, which puts the majority of fireflies are little bitty larvae by July.
Okay.
Some are sooner than that.
And where are the eggs laid? In the ground or?
Depends on the species of firefly again.
Okay.
But generally speaking, if you had to guess, in nice, moist leaf litter or moss that retains moisture but drains water away in case you have a heavy rain, usually the ground somewhere.
Okay.
There are exceptions to that, but generally the ground. And that's why so many of the females can get away with not flying at all. You know, they are earthbound creatures. Some even have little burrows, the females with no wings, that they go into during the day. And no one's real clear if they lay their eggs down in those burrows or where. But anyway, they need moist, rich leaf litter, sometimes banks of stream banks, things like that. And in my early days, when my eyes were super sharp, the eggs actually slightly glow, particularly right before they hatch into larvae. And the best way to see it now, we all have access now. If your cell phone has a long exposure mode, or if you have a good camera, that's the best way to do it. So if you set a long exposure, you can see the eggs glowing, and that's pretty cool. It's not like you're going to walk through the forest and see all these little glowing eggs. That doesn't happen. They're so small, and they are usually kind of covered up. So when the eggs hatch, they come out as larvae, and they are timed, since they're laid at about the same time, they also hatch at about the same time. And so all these little bitty larvae come out, and each genus of species, and we've got probably 7 common genera. We have 20 to 30 species, but each genera has a very distinct type larvae. You can actually tell what genus a firefly it is if you have a fairly good larval picture. And again, each one has their own specific needs, but the larvae come out and they will molt usually around 5 times, and that's called instars. The earliest instar, they're usually little pale, see-through, tiny little things. And as they grow and molt or go into their second instar, their third instar, they get bigger and kind of darker. The ones you see most often are the Photurus larvae. They're the predatory ones that eat the other fireflies, the females do. But they look like a flattened roly-poly bug. That's the best way to describe them. And they have 2 glow spots on the end of their tail, and they don't glow constantly. The little light will go off and on. So the larvae is the longest life stage of fireflies, and that's when we lose populations. We don't necessarily lose them once they are adults. That's so short-lived, and it is important that the female lays eggs for the next generation. But when we're losing species is larvae stage, because they will stay a larvae as much as 2 years. Around here, around East Tennessee, around Kentucky, I think most of them are on a 1-year schedule. Mm-hmm. They're an egg one summer, they're an adult the next. But you get up to the Northeast, and it's 2 and 3 years, because their growing seasons are so much shorter than ours, and it's all about prey availability. The larvae are very carnivorous. They are hunting constantly. They are eating machines. Jim Lloyd, the great firefly scientist who just died this year, sadly, but at one point he said larvae turn from eating machines to being sex machines as adults. And he's right. All they do when they're a larvae is they want to eat. And all they do when they're an adult is they want to find a mate. So the larvae are everywhere, but they're all pretty much in the soil. Again, a few exceptions. They're in the soil. And so if there's in soil with lots of pesticides or compaction or heavy machinery moving the dirt around, they die. They never become an adult. Mm-hmm. Years of terrible droughts can affect them, and did. I don't know about your part of Kentucky. Was 2016 a horrible drought?
I don't remember.
We had biblical drought levels here, and it really did affect the numbers of fireflies for several years. They've all recovered now, but it was devastating to the larvae because it was so dry, and they couldn't find the moisture. They couldn't find the food. Mm-hmm. And some of the species are better at burrowing down deep in the soil, where others are more on the surface, and those surface ones died. I mean, they just didn't make it. But nature is set up for fluctuations of rain and not rain. And so they have recovered now. But anyway, that's the larvae. So people need to understand that's when you lose populations.
What are they eating as larvae? Because I had read like ages ago that they ate like nematodes and stuff. And then one of my first episodes, I talked to Judy and Dan Dorson,
Oh, yeah, the snail
who had done a lot of land snail
Right.
research. And they were mentioning that the land snails and the slugs can get eaten by the fireflies, which I thought was
Yes.
just interesting there. So what all are they eating?
Well, it gets back to what species and what genus, but there is an entire genus called Paractomena, the ones that will be flashing in the treetops in March.
Mhm.
They specialize on snails. They have a long, pointy head, and I show pictures in my book of each type of larvae, but they have a long, pointy head, which allows them to get their head all the way into the snail shells. They have big mandibles with a toxin that they can inject into their prey that numbs the prey much of the time. And so the prey does not even realize they have just been attacked and are being eaten because the firefly larvae is not strong. You know, a snail would probably be stronger, but they don't realize they're being eaten until it's too late. But they eat constantly. And where other larvae that are deeper in the soil would be eating, little tiny nematodes, anything that's sort of small that they can handle. And the ones I've reared, some are super easy to feed because they'll eat everything. They'll eat scrambled eggs and cat food. I mean, they'll eat everything, where others will just look at it and never eat anything. And the ghosts, we've reared some of the first ghost fireflies, the blue ghost and the shadow ghost, from a clutch of eggs that I had the mothers. The mothers exhibit maternal guarding, which is a big deal.
Oh, wow.
In the insect world, and they guard their eggs until death. So we have the first pictures ever of what their larvae look like and everything, and we could not figure out what they needed to eat. And it was so heartbreaking. We were trying so hard. I was on a different research team then with Sarah Lewis and Raphael DeCock, and we offered them everything. We spent the day looking for little tiny things for our little baby ghost larvae to eat, and just one by one they died. And we never could figure it out. So there's so much we don't understand. And one question at the time, my little females guarded, they put their little bodies around their eggs and guarded them for, a month. And if you threaten the mother, she would leave the eggs, but she'd come back as soon as she could. Threatened by, we use the tip of a feather, and that was a threat. And she was very faithful to those eggs. But when she died, when each mother died, we removed them because fungus is such a problem when you're trying to rear eggs. So we removed the mother's bodies. We realized in hindsight, and this is another grad student, hopefully we'll do this someday, we should have left her body, because it might have been, there's a term, I might not say it right, but matrophagy, meaning eating your mother. And it is done in some insect groups, that possibly the fact that she guarded the eggs until her death, it is perhaps possible that her body would have been their first meal. And that's what they needed. And that's why they rejected everything else we tried, which other larvae eat. These would not eat it. And so we still don't know that, but I think it is a possibility. We probably should have thought of that differently. But at the time, we didn't know how long the eggs took. And you hate to have this dead thing sitting in there, but it's all a process.
Yeah. And that's just amazing that you've got parental care like that in an insect.
Isn't that something? It makes you want to cry. I've seen it in Scolopendra, the centipedes. I followed a mother for 29 days, and she guarded her little, or hers weren't even eggs, hers had hatched. And it's just so humbling to watch. So, but yes, in the fireflies, it was a pretty big deal. We had one of the first instances. I think there's an Asian species also that has been shown to guard the eggs, but most of them don't. Most of the species just lay the eggs and go on their way. But it does imply, and it's interesting because this ghost family, they're called Faustus, are considered primitive, meaning they kind of look primitive. But I thought maybe they're the least primitive if they've already developed, what's going on to be almost a social type behavior with their eggs. So, we know so little. There's so much left to be discovered. Nature's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's one of the amazing things about science and nature, and why I never could specialize in anything particular. It's because there's always these cool questions. It's like, oh, I want to know that, and start reading about that. And then, oh, wait a minute. And then you do a
Yeah.
study. And like you said, you get more questions than answers. And to me, that's the sign of an amazing study.
I know there's so many questions and just not enough time, but we're lucky. Yeah. You just follow these things and it keeps the excitement there and the zest for life. And we sure don't know it all. I can promise you that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's see, from the larval stage, they go to the pupa, which, and
Yeah.
butterflies would be the chrysalis.
Right. Okay. So from the larval stage, and we think most of the species around here spend the winter as a larva, but a last instar larva.
Okay.
And that means the last molt, and or next to last, because they'll molt and become a pupa. And then when it begins to warm up in the spring, that would be next month, they become active again. If they've been buried down in the dirt, they come up closer. If they've been under a log or something, they come out. And many of them appear to want one more meal before they pupate, sort of to get that energy, because it will be the last time they eat in their life. They don't eat as adults. They don't have to eat as adults. We've actually found some exceptions now, and so if they get that last meal or whatever, the photo period, the warmth, it's a combination of factors, but then one day they will pupate. And the spring treetop flashers, the Paractomena borealis, are really fun to watch because they do everything on the side of a tree, on the south side of a large diameter tree with furrowed bark, which is often a tulip poplar or a hickory or an oak. So be looking because they're out now. They climb up the trees in the winter and they wait for the warming sun, and they climb up as a larva, and they spend February, because it's happening now, February and early March, looking for the perfect place to be a pupa. And they will investigate every little nook and cranny, but it's always facing south because they want that south sun. And once they find it, they glue their tail to the tree and they hang upside down, and then the miracle of pupation happens. And I've been lucky enough to see it literally happen. It takes about half an hour. And then they hang there totally vulnerable as a pupa for, again, it depends on how warm it is, but it's about 10 days. And then they will emerge as an adult. And so the Paractomena are so fun because it's all on a tree and you can see it. With the vast majority of species, it happens underground, and you'd be very lucky to ever run into it. I mean, I have a few times, but the Paractomena always do it on trees. And when the moment comes where they eclose or emerge as an adult, they come out pure white, like little angels. And I've never gotten tired of seeing that. It's the most exciting thing in the world. And all beetles go through a process called hardening and darkening. And fireflies, being beetles, they do the same thing. But when they emerge out of their pupal case, of course, they're like you said, a butterfly. They're all kind of crunched up and all. So they come out very soft and pure white. The melanin has not coursed through their body yet. And so they only stay pure white for less than a half an hour. And gradually they get grayer and grayer, and pretty soon they're dark. But I get a kick out of seeing that. And again, you're lucky that one species you can see them do it, where you're rarely going to see that with any of the other ones.
I greatly appreciated Lynn sharing her knowledge and passion for lightning bugs with us, and taking so much of her time to talk with us. I've always loved lightning bugs, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Like Lynn said, they bring out the child in all of us. It doesn't matter if you just want to sit in your lawn chair and watch the fireflies dance across your yard, or if you want to try to identify the different species that you see. It also doesn't matter if you call them lightning bugs or fireflies, or like me, both. Whatever you call them and however you choose to enjoy them, they just have a magical way of connecting with us. I also love Lynn's story of how she became the lightning bug lady, because it shows how important just making observations and asking questions can be. She noticed that something was different, became intrigued, shared what she was seeing, and kept asking questions until she was satisfied with the answer. There is so much that we can learn and discover just by doing that. This theme will continue in the second part of our conversation, where we'll talk more about several other recent discoveries that happen in much the same way. Someone paid attention, noticed that something was different, shared it, and asked the questions that led to a new species being identified or a previously overlooked behavior being identified. Also in next week's episode, we'll continue our conversation about the Paractamina or spring treetop flasher larvae and why they may come out so early despite the risk of winter weather. I'm still blown away by the thought that there could be firefly larvae out right now, and we'll definitely be looking for them over the next few weeks. In the second part of our conversation, we'll also talk about some of the threats to lightning bugs, ways we can make our yards more lightning bug friendly, and best practices for observing fireflies. And of course, we'll have more stories and just general geeking out about lightning bugs. I hope you join us for the continuation of our conversation. And if you don't want to wait to learn more about fireflies, then I have links in the show notes to Lynn's book and some of her papers. The show notes, which can either be accessed through your podcast listening app or through the webpage for this episode, is always the place to go for links to more resources. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to let you know about my email list. Every week I send short emails with links to the most recent Backyard Ecology blog articles and podcast episodes, as well as any other news of interest. It's the best way to make sure that you never miss out on anything in the backyard ecology world. If you haven't signed up, then I encourage you to do so at www.backyardecology.net/subscribe. And until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.